Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today we are going to be sharing some more viewer-submitted stories that just can't quite be explained. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a story with the paranormal or something else that's unexplained, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. Joining me today are two friends of mine, one known as Tales to Chill the Bone, the other known as Neminade. If you enjoy their voices, please check out their channels. You can find their links in the top of the description. Now, without further ado, let's get into these creepy stories that can't be explained, sent in by viewers just like you. This happened around the time when I was 16 years old, so quite a while ago. I had just gotten into an argument with my family and had decided to just leave for the night. I had nowhere to go as my friends were all asleep and not answering their phones. I decided I'd just stay at the playground by the school near my house. I got there and sat on the bench around the back of the playground. I didn't want to risk being spotted by a passing car and had them call the cops and say, yeah, there's some weird guy with a hoodie outside the middle school. I sat there still, very angry at how the night was going, when I noticed a man walking up to me from the woods that bordered the school playground. Then, from behind him, emerges these three huge black dogs. Not wanting to draw attention to myself, I looked back down at my phone and pretended he wasn't there. I don't know why I did that, but when I glanced back up about 10 seconds later, he was only roughly 15 feet away from me. He had covered over 100 feet in like 10 seconds. I looked at him in shock. There's no way this should be possible. He then walks right up to the left side of the bench I was on, and his dogs surround me. A wave of absolute sheer terror hit me, like a truck going 100 miles per hour. All the dogs were about 4 feet in height and about 6 feet in length. Their eyes glowed red. I took my eyes off the dogs and looked at the man. He was wearing what looked to be a fedora. I couldn't make out anything else. No facial features, no clothes other than just the hat. Just a black man-shaped shadow. We looked at each other for a while. To this day, I don't know why I said this. I think it was those dogs because something scared me. Call off the dogs. Realizing how stupid it was to say that, I was ready for those dogs to jump on me and tear me apart, but they didn't. The shadow man stood there for a second and walked off towards the front of the school. The dogs followed shortly after. I went back to my house and just sat on the bed all night, wondering what I had just seen. That wasn't a person, and those weren't normal dogs. I have never seen that thing and its dogs again, and I hope I never do. If anybody, has any idea what this could be, please comment down below letting me know. I would appreciate it very much.
I spent a night in a graveyard. Kind of. We actually went on a series of nights, most recently Halloween, and that time I went alone. Why go to a glitzy Hollywood-induced costume party when you can celebrate it the old-fashioned way with a good old ghost hunt? A proper stakeout with coffee and biscuits. We went armed with a torch, digital camera, voice recorder, and of course, our own senses and judgment. Probably the most important tool of all, but also the one most prone to error. Amateurish tech by proper ghost hunting standards, I know, but you have to start somewhere. As with my previous tale, this one comes from the Scottish town of Troon, specifically an old graveyard and church ruins on the outskirts called Crosby Kirkyard. It dates back to 1681, but an older church apparently stood on the site as far back as the 1200s, so we're talking really old here. It was officially closed in 1868 when the town got a bigger cemetery and the gates have been locked ever since. According to legend, the roof of the church blew off during a storm the same night Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, was born in the nearby town of Ayr. However, that tale sounds apocryphal and made up. What's more interesting is a poem made about the place by one John Lang, alleging it to be haunted by ghosts and spunkies. Again, don't just take my word for it. All of this info can be found online. This is a real place with a real history. If you know the local area well enough, there are a few ways to get there, the most direct being through the woods. The gate is permanently locked and the wall more or less insurmountable, though there is a way in by standing on a tree stump around one side and mounting part of the wall. A cemetery at night was a petrifying thought when I was younger, so simply being there in the dark felt like something of an achievement. The hardest part was probably entering in. You're never sure what's over the other side of that wall. I almost had to remind myself that somewhere in here was the resting place of a one-time assassin named David Hamilton, though most say it was really his brother who was guilty and that David was just part of the plot. But that's a debate for another day. My photos were fairly spooky in themselves, showing dark trees and ruins looming up against the gray sky, not to mention the jagged metal of the cemetery gate. But there was nothing out of the ordinary. A few dust specks, maybe. Then I set down my voice recorder and we exited the graveyard, hoping to pick up something in our absence, and returned a half hour later. Just as the novelty of it all was wearing off, we took a seat on an overturned gravestone and were gazing up at the stars when a white streak of light came zooming past right above us. My friend thought it might be a shooting star, but it seemed much too low and small. Shooting stars travel in an arc, whereas this light shot straight by in a perfect line. That was weird. It was to get even weirder. As we set out on our way home, another one of these lights appeared just over the ruined church, zooming into the tree line. It was lucky I turned my head around at that moment to catch it. I wonder how many lights there were that we didn't see. There was no doubting it this time. It was way too low and minuscule to be a shooting star. I can only describe these lights as tiny white balls or globes, which traveled very fast. Either it was a ghost, whatever that might be, or I witnessed a strange light phenomenon, possibly something similar to what we might now call will-o'-the-wisps, or something we don't know about yet. Maybe these lights were the spunkies, or reported in John Lang's poem centuries earlier. Spunky is an old Scots word which basically meant a strange light or glowing. The following evening, I listened back to the audio from my voice recorder, all 27 minutes of it, and I did find something, however faint. In between the gentle wind and car noises are what sounds like a tap, followed by 3 or 4 footsteps. I rewound and compared it with my own footsteps at the start of the recording, and the sound was practically identical. I also tried reproducing the tap sound by touching the screen of the phone and playing it back, and that too sounded quite similar. The whole segment is unique in the whole footage. Was it simply another person, you might ask? Well, although the main road runs nearby, barely anyone walks this way, especially at night. It's a bit out of the way. Type in Crosby Churchyard on Google Maps and you'll see what I mean. And I think it's a pretty fair assumption that we were the only weirdos going into this place at night. I suppose the likeliest explanation is an animal, but the footsteps sounded too slow and heavy to be a squirrel or rabbit, though that's just my own personal judgment. Nothing happened on the other nights, but that still can't diminish our experiences from the first time. Beginner's luck, I suppose. In fact, the only vaguely paranormal thing we encountered on the second night was a noise outside my friend's house on the homeward journey. Then the thought came to me that what we call the paranormal probably works in a very funny way, or, bizarre as it sounds, like fishing. You can go 10 times and only catch something once or twice. All my run-ins with ghosts so far have had that kind of theme. There's something there, not overly clear or discernible, but still quite out of the ordinary. Then in an instant, it's gone or doesn't show up again. It's not as if you can catch it up close and take it back to test in a lab, but you know there was definitely a weird element about the experience. I don't give much credit to feelings of being watched or of a presence. After all, that you feel scared is a fact about yourself and not your surroundings. But I suppose it's not a bad thing to say that at no point in the investigation was I genuinely frightened or alarmed. I even liked it in there. The magical stillness of it all. If one thing's for sure, it's that the dead are less likely to harm you than the living. But whether they are all truly at rest, I still can't say.
When I was around 15 years old, I was living with my grandfather. He doesn't have much land, but it's enough to get lost. One night, I woke up to a weird noise and decided to go investigate it. So I grabbed the 12 gauge he had by the door and headed outside. I walked to the tree line before I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. I turned my head just enough to see what looked like a big dog. Now, we had chickens and didn't have dogs, so I was going to take a shot and scare it off. Just as I was going to take a shot at this dog, it stood up on its back legs, and that's when I realized it wasn't a dog, but some sort of man possibly. A very tall man at that. He looked at me with a weird look and let out a kind of growling noise. He started to walk closer, and I could hear my heart beating in my chest as he walked into the light, showing two very big eyes and a smile from ear to ear. Out of fear, I took a shot but missed. I didn't dare. I dropped the gun and ran into the house to get my grandfather. I never looked behind me. I didn't want to see what was behind me. He bolted out of the front door to be greeted by the same creature I had just seen, and without reacting approached it in anger, but stopped when he realized it was just looking, not moving an inch. Keep in mind, he was just inches from this beast. It took a step back and smiled even bigger, also revealing its mouth. I was stunned to see its mouth open so far. It was open far enough that I could probably stick my head in, but my grandfather wouldn't let that happen, hopefully. My grandfather didn't take time to look. He grabbed me and ran into the house, locking the door. About 10 to 15 minutes later, he checked and it was still there, only further away and looking right at us still, smiling, that evil smile. The next day it was gone, and I'll never go outside in the dark again. This was roughly around 5 or so years ago, and I haven't had a problem since, but to this day it still scares the heck out of me, and even while writing this, I wonder what it was, and why did it do what it did. If anybody has any idea, please let me know in the comments down below, and thank you Swamp for sharing my short, but rather creepy story.
This happened a few years ago, and I'm not friends with those mentioned in this experience. There are no hard feelings between any of us anymore, so none of this is to hurt or affect anyone. Now that I have that out of the way, I can begin to tell you what happened that fall night. It was October 12th, and my friends Michael and Caitlin and I wanted to go check out this abandoned farm just outside of Stratford, Ontario. We left around 11. We had to sneak out of our houses so that our parents wouldn't know we'd left or we were out. We got a ride from Caitlin's older brother, Dolan, and he waited at the end of the driveway for us, just in case we had to make a quick escape. We walked up the decently sized driveway, slowly making our way up to the first barn. Looking over it, there were some haystacks and some really old corn husks. There were also some rusty tools and some old tires, but nothing that really caught our eye. We soon left the area and walked out the back, making our way to the house that barely stood anymore. The roof seemed to have caved in, and the windows were all smashed, and there were a few pieces of graffiti, but it wasn't an insanely large amount. We climbed through the knocked-in door, entering what we assumed used to be a living room. Upon entry, we noticed old rotting couches and chairs, along with some broken and cracked flower pots that were scattered around the room. There was an old fireplace, ruined and falling apart. I decided to take a look up into the chimney. When I shone my flashlight up, I saw two pairs of eyes before the sounds of wings flapping filled the air. I was able to duck out and push myself away just in time for two decently sized bats to fly out after me before flying out of one of the broken windows. We laughed this off and kept exploring the house. We made it into a very old, wrecked kitchen, which was moldy and had moss everywhere. The air quality was so bad, I had to put one of those masks on patients at hospitals who are sick have to wear. I have pretty sucky lungs, and I didn't want to risk anything. We got out of the kitchen before quickly making our way to the back of the house, where we reached a little sitting room. There were green and blue tinted chairs and flowers overgrowing everywhere. The area looked like something out of a fairy tale, as the light of the full moon shone in through one of the broken windows. I looked around in awe until something outside caught my attention. It looked like an animal, but unsure and still curious, but somewhat spooked. I told Michael and Caitlin that we should check out the next barn quickly and leave, as it was getting way too late for teens of our age to be out. They agreed, and we made our way out of the house and over to a barn with a huge silo attached. We entered through the silo doors, looking up at that huge tube of metal. It was the type of cliché barn you would see in a countryside romance movie, where the city girl falls in love with the country guy. It was moldy, but everything was intact. As we entered, I got a sudden cold chill down my back, and I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes upon me. Strangely, as I looked around the room, I only saw Michael and Caitlin. We're doing the exact same thing. We decided that it was time to get out of Dodge, and made the choice to take a trail from the farm back to the front of the driveway. As we walked out, we started hearing noises from the side of the barn. We cautiously walked a bit further away from the sound. After careful movement, we finally made it to the side of the barn. It felt like several minutes had passed, but in truth, it was a few seconds. We decided to walk a bit more casually now and hope whatever was there wouldn't attack us. We walked out, careful to keep our gaze ahead of us. We didn't want to look towards the sound, as we didn't want to tip anything off that might have been out there. Naturally, I couldn't keep my curiosity at bay forever, and I did eventually look back. It was a mistake I wish I never made. I stopped dead in my tracks at the thing limping before me. It looked like a deer, but its ribs and stomach were mutilated, and its face was 60% skull. The eyes were wide and sunken in, and the color of the eyes, oh God, they were the most inhuman yellow I've ever seen. The back legs were taller than the front, and had no tail. It looked like it had been ran over with a tractor. I noticed that Michael and Caitlin had stopped, and noticed it as well. We all stood in silence, watching this thing limp into the woods. Once it was out of sight, and we came to our senses, we booked it out of there, to the car. When we made it to Dolan in the car, we jumped in and screamed at him to slam on it. We raced away from that place and never went back. We never spoke about it again, and a year later, our friendship fell apart. A couple years ago, I stumbled upon stories about skinwalkers, and I'm 100% sure that is what we saw that day. There isn't a thing about that deer that seemed normal. It just felt so inhuman and wrong. I hope I never see that thing again, but I really want to go back. Maybe if I do, I'll post my experience of what happens, but I don't think it's worth my life.
Hello, my name is Ari. I'm 17 and live in Hawaii. I was born here and have pretty much lived here my entire life. Growing up here is a lot. I do believe I wouldn't be the person I am now if I hadn't gone through the things I've experienced growing up here. Anyone local can tell you a handful of spooky things about this island off the back of their head. Almost everyone has had their own share of personal experiences. I live in a really interesting neighborhood. My neighborhood only has one street light, and it's at the entrance of the neighborhood next to the community mailboxes. I live on the same road as the mailboxes, but a few houses down. The houses are pretty spread out, and you can only see the front yards and some of the front part of the house because of the overgrown forest surrounding them. My neighborhood is thick, lush forest that goes up the side of a mountain. There are two main paved roads that go two ways. They both go up to the mountain deeper into the neighborhood. The main road is called a diamond head. It goes straight to the top of the neighborhood and has 15 dirt roads that turn off into separate ways. I don't ever walk the diamond head unless I have to. I walk the other road though. It's the same one I live on, but it turns up the mountain a little ways past where you turn the diamond head. Every day I walk my dog, Regina, all the way up to the top, and then we turn around and walk 2 to 3 miles in. The paved road continues for at least a mile and then turns to a dirt road that continues on for a much longer walk than I usually go. There are a few cow farms out there. I've only gotten far enough to pass one though. I usually get too tired. I enjoy spending time out there normally. It's so beautiful and Regina loves it. I like to spend as much time outside as I can, so I usually spend hours up there. This one day went a bit different though. I already wasn't in a really good mood, but I started to feel better when I and Regina got to our spot. I let her off the leash and she ran to me as I skateboarded the paved road. We got comfortable. I sat on the side of the road to take some pictures of this little bright green grasshopper who sat upon a yellow flower while Regina sat beside me. We weren't even up there for that long. We hadn't even gone that far in. Regina all of a sudden let out this deep growl which took me really off guard. I just thought it was someone on their morning walk, but when I looked up, there was nothing. Regina stood stiff, dead-eyed, staring at something in the distance. I got this god-awful, foreboding feeling inside my chest, and I got lightheaded. I struggled to put my camera back into my bag and get Reggie's leash on her. It was a good thing I did too, because not a second after that, she lunges forward and lets out this god-awful scream. She was barking, growling, and making noises that I've never heard her make, or any dog make for that matter. All of her hair on her body stood up. I pulled her back on her leash and tried to scope out what she was seeing, but I just saw nothing. Regina was really scaring me at this point. She was lunging forward and then hopping backward, striking forward, snapping her jaws. I had never seen her act this way. It happened all so fast. I had this feeling like something really didn't want me to be there. I skated out of there as fast as I could. The whole time I skated, Regina ran with her tail between her legs, looking back as we got further away. I felt like something was at my ankles the whole time too. I was way too scared to look back though. This event just made me really uncomfortable. Nothing up there has happened since, but things are happening at my house more now. It sucks because I really started to think things were settling down a bit after last year and all. Yeah, last year was eventful. Things started to get really crazy when I moved back here after my freshman year in Portland. I didn't have electricity for a year when I first moved back, and you live in a house with no power, you really start to pay attention to your surroundings. My mom used to leave me home all the time with my little sister. She was out working sometimes and she wouldn't come home until the next morning, so there were a few times where I and my sister went through some pretty scary things all alone. One time when my mom wasn't home, me and my sister were chilling in my bedroom, which was at the back of the house. We had our flashlight and candlelight. We had been listening to something fly around the house for 10 minutes or so. It would land on the roof with a loud bang, and then it would slowly creep around back and forth. We could hear sharp scratching and clicking. It would walk in different patterns. First, it would be on 2 feet, then the sound of 4 feet running. The scratching of long, sharp nails above us. It really sounded like a big dog was up there when it would run, but at the same time it sounded like a person. It sounded as heavy as a human, but the noises it made didn't come close. I and my sister were huddled up in a corner of my room, sitting on my bed with our flashlight. The scariest parts would often be when it got really quiet. The walls to that room were mostly glass. One giant glass window, a window on the ceiling to see the stars, and a giant sliding glass door. Sometimes, when it got really quiet, we could hear something on the porch next to the giant window. A little tap on the glass, or long, slow scratches down the side of the glass door. Us not being able to see anything because of how dark it was outside made it even scarier. But knowing something could see us in here, that was downright terrifying. We'd hear the occasional flying around, and if it was like circling the house. We stayed quiet in the room listening to whatever was outside. Eventually, it screeched, and then I think it flew off. It's something I don't know what it was, and something I'll never be able to forget about. It just echoes in the back of my mind. Sometimes, I know it's not just my imagination though. That night went on for so long, my poor little sister was so scared. I did my best to hold myself together and look brave. It was hard in the end though. We had a landline connected downstairs outside. Since we didn't have electricity, my mom's boyfriend tweaked our landline to work hooked up to our electric box. So I heard the phone ring, and I wanted to know if it was our mom or not. So I got up, and so does my sister. She brings the light with me to see what's happening, but she waits at the top of the stairs for me. I answer the phone, but it wasn't my mom. It was my best friend calling to tell me that she found my guard dog in town, and she would bring her to me. This made me feel so relieved because this was my childhood dog, who's always made me feel safe. She went missing earlier that day, and I'm glad somebody found her. I told her thank you, and if she could bring her to me, that would be awesome. But before I could say anything else, my sister screamed. My head snapped around and she was standing there pointing into the sky above my driveway. Hovering above the tree line was this giant glowing orb, and it blinked like a disco ball. When it blinked, the whole sky lit up. It was like something I can't even explain. It was almost like turning on a light switch. All I remember is dropping the phone, running up the stairs and grabbing my sister and slamming the front door behind us. She was crying and I was baffled in holding her. Not too long after that, my friend brought our dog back and we felt much safer that night. But after they left, the screeching came back. This time my neighbor's dog was missing for a few days, but then was found severely injured in a lava tube behind my neighbor's house. After that night happened, I realized it wasn't the first time I had heard the screeching and flying sounds. The first time was a month after I moved back from Portland and I was sleeping over at my homie's house, who ironically didn't have electricity either. So, me and him, our two other homies, were sleeping on couches in his living room. His house is made out of glass. It's super cool, but it's not fully built yet. That's why there's no electricity. There also aren't any doors, so there are like 3 openings to the house. One where his dog is tied up at, so nothing's really going to go past there, and the others are kind of just openings. It was really late and we were all falling asleep, but I was wide awake because I had sleeping issues at this time in my life, so I wasn't laying there trying to fall asleep. I was actually too busy noticing how the dogs all of a sudden were barking in unison. This happened seemingly every night. Every night, same time, every night. The dogs at the bottom of the hood start barking first and it slowly makes its way up to the top. I'm laying there listening to the howls and barks get closer. It builds its way up the streets. My homie's dog starts to growl. She went outside to check on things for a minute or two but started whining and came back inside. It was about 20 minutes or so when I started to hear a flapping sound above the house. The dog didn't notice it, so I was like about it at first, until I heard it land in the front yard. I heard the gravel driveway crunch as something crept towards the house. The sensor light came on and that's when homie's dog lost it. Her head snapped up as she made eye contact with something outside. I watched her eyes narrow in the moonlight as her hair slowly stood up, but she didn't move. She growled a little but stayed still. She wasn't even blinking. I heard the gravel crunch one more time. That's when homie's dog took off after whatever it was that was outside. She didn't make it outside before it took off back into the sky with one loud whooshing sound. I didn't think much of it until something happened to my sister. I told my mom about it, and they used to be friends with these guys too. I have so many new things that have been happening that I'd like to share with you. So many things have happened just this week, but I don't even know how to honestly begin. Maybe I'll write them at another time. Thank you, though, very much for sharing my experience. I know it sounds absolutely insane, but if anybody has any idea what could be making these noises, what is causing the dogs to go wild, what is causing these lights, and what the heck is flying around out there, I would be very, very appreciative. And thank you very much, Swamp, for sharing my story. Thanks for listening to these creepy and unexplained horror stories. These stories are pretty creepy, and honestly, I can't even begin to try to explain most of them. If you enjoyed my guests today, Tales to Chill the Bone and Nemi Nade, please be sure to check out their channels. They're new and up-and-coming narrators who could definitely use a little bit of love. You can find their channels in the top of the description below. The links will be provided. If you guys enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button, as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not join us? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. If you have a story you would like to share in a future episode, whether it be something that's unexplained or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours to help keep this channel going. If you're not aware, you can download your favorite scary stories from the swamp on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, Podbean, and pretty much every other podcasting website. I know not all of you guys have data, so this will definitely help you out. As always, I appreciate you guys for lurking in my swamp with me. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video. Oh, and if you made it all the way to the end, today's code word is Invasion of the Puppies. Comment that down below if you made it all the way to the end, to confuse people and just to let me know that you did. I'll see you guys soon. Tally ho.